and all of what we're discussing is dependent upon people and having the right people, attracting and retaining talent. And in this environment, how do hedge funds do that?
When we think about growth, we see institutionalization as a prerequisite to that growth. And what I mean by that is you're not going to grow without recruiting, you're not going to grow AUM and drive those returns without recruiting heads. And it's an industry that continues to have a scarcity of talent. And so thinking about the talent you have inside the organization, whether it's newly hired in that first year into a firm, and how they assimilate into the ways of working within a fund, it's very different to some of the larger institutions some of the front office folks may have come from. We see that as an important piece around the onboarding process, and also the retention of existing. This is an industry where it is competitive, people can go to different firms, and making sure that in this environment where it's not just about bonuses and compensation, but other benefits in terms of job opportunities, flexible working, non-financial elements, that they get reflected in terms of retention.
You know, a client once said to me that it's the second 5 years that are the hardest. And certainly putting aside the market pressures and the ability to sustain that period, I think they're right. I think the first 5 years, it's all about growth. You know, firms go from 5 people to 10 people to 20 people to 40 people, and that requires huge shifts in the way they manage those people. But after the first 5 years, when they get to a certain critical mass, then it's about sustaining that. And we also have to remember that this industry has grown organically, so really grown from within, but because of the growth of the industry and other things that are happening in the capital markets, it's now attracted people from all different backgrounds, and so those people have different expectations about all the things Rushan was talking about, and firms need to continue to evolve their practices.
We're even seeing more of those founders or principals actually try and change the culture that they once created. So they're actually trying to drive institutionalization and more transparency, and let's have segregation of duties in terms of some of those roles, and let's have more standard processes in finance or tax or HR. So it's actually interesting that those very people who were the entrepreneurs are actually looking to shape and drive some of that culture change.
And maybe sticking with that, so it's generally been about the investment process, making the best investment decisions that you can, obviously about the ability to distribute and sell and grow from an asset perspective. But are we seeing the chief risk officer, chief compliance officer, chief technology officer being reflected differently within these organizations? Are we seeing them have that seat at the table now that maybe they didn't necessarily in the past?
Well, I mean, first you have those officers now.
Right.
So people are
right.
no longer double or triple hatting, and you have a chief risk officer that's separate from a portfolio manager, and you have a chief compliance officer that's separate from a CFO or a GC. And not only a person, but you have little mini departments. Tax is a perfect example where almost all firms of size have a tax director and maybe 2 or 3 people in the department, given the complexity, and compliance the same way. Certainly compliance is an area where that person needs to have the right authority and profile within the firm, and that's one of the first things that the SEC will try to assess, frankly, as an indication of how important compliance is within that firm.
And I think from a global perspective, it certainly is the SEC, but I think, as we know, this has become a very global industry, and what might be a question or a concern of the SEC is certainly going to be common across the globe with other regulators. I mean, we've talked about people, process, and technology for years, and I think we've now added data as kind of the fourth leg of that stool. It really is about people, process, technology, and data. And oftentimes they look at financial institutions, they have a lot of people, but at the heart of it, it's about data and how are you able to manage data, and how does technology allow you to do that effectively.
And in our industry, that data has been fragmented.
Absolutely.
Some of it sits in the IR function, some of it sits in tax, finance. Let's not forget about the administrators that are outside the 4 walls of the manager, and so management of data has been much more complicated.
Absolutely.
And a lot of it's manual, it's on spreadsheets.
Sure,
which,
sure.
When you go back to scaling this business, and Mike mentioned how you decouple some of those roles and responsibilities, when we presented this at a recent seminar, 2/3 of the audience said reorganizing work and changing job roles was their highest priority from a people perspective next year. So it's interesting. I think we're seeing not only the roles now being created, but more scaling of those functions. The HR function isn't just one person now. There's going to be a team. There's going to be a compensation head. There's going to be folks who are focused on for talent management, for example. And there's definitely going to be more separation of responsibilities as they grow through headcount to drive better return, drive increased AUM.
I mean, we're seeing that in the finance function, for example. There's more and more people who are brought in just to deal with financial reporting. That's a process in and of itself that needs controls and structure. We're seeing more finance-related people working with compliance because of the regulatory reporting aspect of it. So it's not just about the rules and regulations, it's about getting the data out of the system
Right.
and onto the reporting forms. And so you need to bridge compliance with operations and finance more.